A number of the gens de couleur, like La Toussaint d'Ouverture, are extremely well educated. Now, Toussaint actually ends up dying in French prison when he's trying to negotiate with Napoleon. Napoleon is going to try and take Haiti back, but he decides, no, I'd rather conquer Europe instead. So we'll just cut our losses here. Um, and so there's a growing awareness very much about the inequality of slavery and exactly how wrong this practice is. So you're going to see the increasing debate within definitely England, led by William Wilberforce, about the idea of um, the equality of the black man. If we're talking about total liberty, etc., we can't necessarily limit that to just the white community. And yet, while we might be talking about freedom, political freedom, or legal freedom, we are not necessarily talking about political rights. Generally, we're talking, there's very much the assumption, although you do have influential black leaders, educated black leaders, there's still this idea of inequality. And so, while slavery while the slave trade is going to be banned, and while we're going to see a progressive movement by abolitionists to ban the practice as well, the civil rights is going to become a much more tricky issue. And we're going to be covering that within the next few weeks. Very much a similar issue with women. Again, we talked about the brief change in France prior to Napoleon, which was then rescinded. Again, it's very much that issue over the meaning of humanity. Directly white men of a certain income bracket, or are we actually going to be looking for a more universal meaning? And that's something we need to debate with. Now, the other part, I mentioned that Napoleon is influential in two ways. One, of course, is the continued revolutions in the Atlantic world. The other is Europe in political recovery. So, there's an English political philosopher known as Edmund Burke, and one of the things he writes about is the issue of revolutions and what revolutions does to civil society. He indicates that the United States Revolution was logical, it was natural, it was going to happen. The American colonists, they're separated by a very large distance from Great Britain, they're used to governing themselves. Eventually, it makes sense that they would want to cut ties with Britain politically. But the French Revolution, he says, is perverse. It's unnatural. It's not right. Because while America retained a great deal of its civil society, France completely obliterated theirs. They turned the entire world upside down. So, what Napoleon is linked to is not just the French Revolution in terms of the early stages, but the way in which he was able to exert so much influence over Europe is going to create a sort of political backlash against the Enlightenment, against liberalism. This is going to be the emergence of conservatism, quest for social and political stability after the French Revolution. Now, conservatives warn that rapid change based upon revolutionary ideals are only going to end in terror and chaos, and that change needs to occur much more slowly. And they look at France, they look at Haiti, they look at Latin America, and they look at Napoleon as evidence for that idea. But liberals are going to argue, those individuals who are still very much affected by the revolutionary period, by the Enlightenment, that individuals still need to recognize their own liberty and they need to be able to create a new society. To stagnate this is only going to make society more backwards. So, yes, there were definitely issues with the French Revolution, there were definitely issues with Napoleon, but you shouldn't label the whole movement as a failure. Now, what we're also seeing an emergence of is nationalism, and nationalism is also something Napoleon happened to bring to the forefront. Although a number of these other nations are definitely entranced by Napoleon's civil code, this idea of legal equality, they really don't like a foreign leader taking control. And so nationalism is this idea that there is a bond shared by a group of people who feel very strongly attached to a particular land and who also have a common language, a common culture, and history. So nationalists are seen as threats by conservatives because nationalists want to have new revolutions. They want to really create these nations that are based on these common bonds rather than being part of these large multi ethnic empires like the Holy Roman Empire, the German states. Let's have, or the various Italian states, let's unify together because there's more power in unity rather than all the separateness. The nationalists are seen as major threats by conservatives because they fear new revolutions upsetting the peace that has finally emerged after the second exile of Napoleon. Now, conservatism is going to definitely be a major mark on Europe, but it's going to be impossible to completely restore the old regime the way the conservatives want to. Too much has changed in the world to allow return. The balance of power among European powers definitely remains, but individual countries are seeing a number of political and social upheavals as the ideas of nationalism and popular sovereignty gain a strong hold over the people. What we see in the mid 19th century are the 1848 revolutions that use liberalism and nationalism as one. The 1848 revolutions begin in France over workers' rights and spread through Europe to the German states. Young students and intellectuals are attempting to fuse liberalism and nationalism to create a new order in Europe, but these revolutions are going to be crushed. There's quite a bit of decline or disillusionment with liberalism because these revolutions failed against the reigning parties. But nationalism isn't going to die. And so conservatives are going to try and figure out a way to use nationalism to basically stay in power and to create a new order. Now, one of the best examples of an individual who can do this is Otto von Bismarck. He is definitely a conservative, but he sees the incentive for a strong, unified Germany rather than a bunch of separate states that are all split up and have no cohesion. There is prestige, wealth, and political influence in this. So, what Bismarck does is he starts a couple insignificant wars to get public support for Prussia, which is where he helps govern. And Prussia, for a long time, has been considered to be one of the most elite of the German states. As Prussia begins to gain quite a bit of renowned prestige amongst other German states, he's very much winning support by these states who want to join with Prussia, who want to join and get in with some of this power and get in with some of this prestige. And because he's doing all this under national aspirations for Prussia and a future Germany, the old liberals are sort of swayed by this. It's like, okay, well, it's not entirely what we wanted, but we were looking for that national identity, so, we can swing with this. Now, what this is going to be referred to by Bismarck, it's called blood and iron. That the problems of the day are not going to be solved with speeches, with parliamentary debates. It's going to be solved by force. And Bismarck, I think, he didn't really recognize how true his words were going to be because the use of force in military display worked for him so well. And we're going to see how well they work in other parts of the world over time. Now we're in the era of the nation state, and we're going to be seeing what people can achieve for their nation. Whether or not that's really good, or as we see, bad for others involved.